Remember back in 2023, everybody was freaking out about $8 cartons of eggs?
Yeah.
Well, get ready because it's 2025 and now we're staring down $4.95 a dozen.
Wow.
Now, avian flu and labor shortages definitely haven't helped.
Right.
But there's another, I guess, big player here, and that's that escalating trade war between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how something as basic as like, a carton of eggs
Right.
can become like a measure for, these global economic tensions.
Yeah.
This trade war isn't just like some theoretical thing happening in boardrooms. It's like actually hitting people where it hurts in their wallets.
Okay, so let's break down this trade war. We've got a whole stack of research here. Expert analysis from Bloomberg, Third Eye Analyst, White and Case, the South China Morning Post, and CNA.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
Yeah. So our mission is to go deeper than the headlines,
Mm-hmm.
like really understand the strategies and the moves that are shaping this whole conflict.
Yeah, it's all about going beyond the surface, right? Like
Right.
trying to understand the why behind all these crazy headlines we keep seeing.
Exactly.
These sources, I think they give us a kind of like a peek behind the curtain,
Right.
at the motivations and the potential fallout that goes way beyond just like, simple economic retaliation.
Okay, so let's rewind to the beginning of 2025. So Trump just secured his second term, and bam, he hits China, Canada, and Mexico with a 25% tariff on, well, a whole bunch of goods.
Yeah.
What was he thinking?
Well, on the surface, I mean, it looks like classic protectionism, right?
Right.
Trying to like protect American industries,
Mm-hmm.
bring back those manufacturing jobs, that kind of thing.
Right.
But, in reality, things are always more complex, and some experts are even saying that this whole thing could backfire.
Right, and like the folks at the Peterson Institute of International Economics, they estimate that these tariffs could end up costing the average American household an extra like $1,200 a year.
Oof.
Yeah, so it's not just theoretical economic policy anymore.
Right.
It's real money coming out of people's pockets.
Yeah, it's not just the added cost either. It's the ripple effect, like
Yeah.
how this is disrupting supply chains, causing price hikes on all kinds of consumer goods.
Right.
And yeah, even playing a part in those crazy egg prices we were just talking about.
Okay, so Trump throws down the gauntlet with these tariffs, but China's no pushover.
No, not at all.
So how did they respond?
China's retaliation, I think, it's almost like a masterclass in strategy. It's like they're playing chess, carefully calculated to put the maximum pressure on the U.S., but at the same time trying to minimize the damage to themselves.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break this counter strategy down for me.
Sure. So China's response, it kind of unfolds in like 3 phases.
Okay.
First, they hit back with tariffs of their own, but they're very targeted, very strategic. So it's 15% on U.S. coal and LNG, which is liquefied natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
And then 10% on things like crude oil, agricultural machinery, and pickup trucks. Did you notice anything interesting about those choices?
Well, it seems like those are all sectors that are really important to Trump's base,
Right.
Farmers, blue-collar workers, people in those like energy-producing states.
Exactly.
It's almost like a direct hit to his political support.
It's not just an economic fight.
Right.
There's a political game going on here, too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then their second move, it targets 5 specific materials: tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, molybdenum, and indium.
Okay.
These might sound kind of obscure,
Right.
but they are absolutely essential for a lot of U.S. industries, especially tech and defense.
Okay, hold on. Help me out here. Why are those specific materials so important?
These 5 elements, they belong to a group called rare earth minerals, and they're crucial components for everything from semiconductors and solar panels to advanced weaponry and aerospace technology.
Wow.
And guess what? China, they dominate the global production of these minerals.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this. So by restricting exports of these minerals, China's basically squeezing some of America's most vital industries?
Exactly.
Ooh.
It's a power play, using their dominance in a sector where the U.S. is heavily dependent on them. And then comes their third move. They gave TVH Group, which is the parent company of fashion brands like Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, and the biotech firm Illumina, to their unreliable entity list.
Okay, I've heard of that list, but I'm a little fuzzy on what it, actually means. What happens to companies that end up on it?
Well, being on this list, it's basically like a big red flag for foreign companies operating in China.
Right.
It means that the Chinese government considers them unreliable, and it exposes them to all sorts of risks.
Right.
like increased scrutiny, regulatory hurdles,
Right.
and in extreme cases, even asset freezes and market bans.
Wow, that's serious. And it's not just limited to those specific companies, right?
Right.
I remember reading about China launching an anti-monopoly probe into Google around the same time,
Mm-hmm.
even though Google basically has a minimal presence in the Chinese market.
Yeah, you're picking up on a really important point here.
Okay.
These actions, they send a
Okay.
message to all U.S. companies, but especially the tech sector,
Right.
that China is not afraid to use its power, its regulatory power, to exert pressure and influence behavior. It's a warning shot,
Okay.
reminding everybody who holds the cards in their own backyard.
So if we zoom out a little and look at the bigger picture, it seems like China's strategy is all about playing the long game,
Mm-hmm.
minimizing their own economic damage while also putting pressure on the U.S.
Exactly. They're picking their battles carefully, focusing on areas where they have a clear strategic advantage.
Hmm.
Like, take their tariffs, for example. They only affect about $20 billion worth of U.S. imports.
Okay.
Compare that to the $450 billion of Chinese goods hit by U.S. tariffs. It's a big difference.
Wow. Yeah. It's like they're using a scalpel
Right.
and the U.S. is swinging a sledgehammer. They're targeting specific points
Hmm.
while the U.S. is casting this wide net. They could end up damaging their own economy in the process.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And let's not forget about energy. China only relies on the U.S. for a tiny fraction of its crude oil needs, about 1.7%.
Oh, wow.
They could easily just turn to other suppliers like Russia or Australia.
So they're not as dependent on U.S. imports as the U.S. is on them.
Right, especially when it comes to those rare birth minerals we were talking about.
Right.
That's a key vulnerability for the U.S. in this whole trade war. China's dominance in that market, it gives them leverage, a way to influence not just the economy, but also technology and even the military balance of power.
This is getting intense. But this isn't just a U.S.-China issue, is it?
No, it's not.
This is impacting the whole world.
You're absolutely right. This trade war, it's sending ripples across the globe, affecting alliances, international relations, and the very foundation of the global trade system.
Okay, so we've kind of laid out the initial moves, the opening volleys, I guess, in this high-stakes game of economic chess.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I think we need to take a quick pause.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll explore how this trade war is, reshaping the global landscape and what that means for the future of international relations.
When we talk about these trade wars, it's important to remember that they're rarely a simple win-lose situation.
Right.
The idea that one side comes out on top, and the other suffers defeat, it's often a misconception.
So you're saying there's more nuance to it than just who comes out on top.
Absolutely.
What are we missing when we think about these trade wars in such simplistic terms?
I think what often gets overlooked are the unintended consequences.
Right.
The ripple effects that go way beyond just the initial targets.
Okay.
Like, take, for instance, one of the main goals of Trump's tariffs was to revitalize American manufacturing.
Right.
The thinking was that by making imports more expensive, companies would be encouraged to shift production back to the U.S.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But did it actually work out that way? Where did it actually see those manufacturing jobs coming back to America?
The reality is way more complicated. While some companies might have considered moving production back,
Right.
a lot of them faced huge challenges because they rely so heavily on these global supply chains.
Right.
These tariffs, they often ended up increasing costs for American businesses,
Okay.
especially the ones that depend on imported goods.
Right.
I'm talking about everything from raw materials to components for electronics and machinery.
So instead of helping American businesses, these tariffs might actually be making things harder for them by making their operations more expensive.
That's definitely a possibility, and it shows just how interconnected the global economy really is.
Yeah.
These tariffs messed up these intricate webs of supply chains that companies have spent decades building.
Right.
And that often leads to higher prices for consumers.
Which brings us right back to those $4.95 eggs.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that these big economic battles, they have a real impact on our daily lives. Even on something as basic as groceries.
Absolutely.
Okay, so while the U.S. was dealing with all these challenges, it seems like China was busy taking advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, their Made in China 2025 initiative, which is all about making China a global leader in technology that actually gained momentum because of these trade tensions.
Right.
Wait, how did the tariffs actually help China achieve those ambitions?
Well, think of the tariffs like a shield,
Okay.
protecting Chinese industries from foreign competition.
Right.
And that basically created a more favorable environment for some sectors to grow and innovate.
Right.
especially the ones that aligned with the goals of Made in China 2025, like agriculture and, the rare earth processing I were talking about before.
So it's like Trump was trying to protect American industries, but he might have accidentally sped up China's progress toward becoming a tech superpower.
It really highlights the complex and often unpredictable nature of these trade wars.
Right.
Actions you take trying to get one result can lead to completely unexpected and even opposite outcomes.
Okay, so it's not as easy as saying one side wins and the other one loses.
No.
Sounds like both sides are facing their own unique challenges and experiencing unintended consequences.
Yeah.
But are there any clear winners in this whole trade war, or is it just a lose-lose situation all around?
That's the question everyone is asking.
Right.
It's a very complicated situation where both sides have vulnerabilities.
Right.
The U.S., for example, they're dealing with the risks of stagflation, which is basically a combination of rising prices, which is inflation,
Right.
and slow economic growth, and that can be a really tricky situation to manage.
And what about, like, America's image on the world stage?
That's an important point, too.
Yeah.
The U.S. has always considered itself a reliable trading partner and a supporter of free trade.
Right.
But all these tariffs and protectionist policies, they've put a strain on relationships with allies and could hurt America's reputation globally.
So the economic damage is just one part of an equation.
Mm-hmm.
There's also these geopolitical implications to consider.
Right.
Okay, so what about China?
Yeah.
What are some of their weak spots in all of this?
Well, China might have handled the initial impact pretty well,
Okay.
but they definitely have their own set of problems.
Okay.
Their economy is not immune to the global slowdown, and they're also dealing with this ongoing property crisis.
Right.
And that's creating a lot of uncertainty in their financial markets.
Yeah, I've heard about that property crisis. It sounds like a pretty big deal what's going on there.
Well, basically, China's real estate market has been in a slump.
Okay.
Property prices have been dropping, and there's worry about a potential bubble burst.
Right.
This is a major vulnerability for China because their economy is heavily dependent on the real estate sector.
So both sides are walking this tightrope, trying to balance their own goals with the potential for things to really go wrong.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening at the same time as this global pandemic that's already disrupted supply chains and created so much economic uncertainty.
Exactly.
It's like a juggling act with way too many balls in the air.
It is a delicate balancing act, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Right.
And as we said before, this trade war isn't just affecting the U.S. and China. It's impacting the global economy and reshaping international relationships in ways we're only just starting to understand.
You mentioned before that China has been strengthening their relationship with Russia.
Right.
And also kind of cozying up to some of America's allies like Germany and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
What's the strategy there?
Well,
Is this all tied to the trade war, or are there other things going on?
China's diplomatic moves are definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Okay.
They seem to be actively looking to build more partnerships and lessen their reliance on the U.S.
Okay.
By strengthening ties with Russia, they gain a powerful ally on the world stage,
Right.
one that shares their concerns about the West's dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And by building relationships with U.S. allies like Germany and Japan, they're subtly creating divisions in that traditional Western alliance.
It's like they're setting themselves up for a future where they're not so reliant on the U.S.,
Right.
both economically and politically.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like they're preparing for a world where the U.S. is no longer the only superpower calling the shots.
That's a very insightful observation.
Thanks.
And it's not just about new alliances either.
Okay.
It's also about using their economic power to gain influence.
Right.
Take, for example, their Belt and Road Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
They're investing heavily in infrastructure projects all over the world.
Right.
And that gives them a presence in important regions and strengthens their economic ties with developed countries.
So they're using their economic power to grow their influence globally and reshape the geopolitical landscape.
Exactly.
It's pretty fascinating and, honestly, a little bit concerning.
It definitely raises some big questions about how global power dynamics will play out in the future.
Yeah.
And as this trade war keeps going, these questions are going to become even more important.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the fallout of these tariffs to all the behind-the-scenes maneuvering going on.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump into what all this could mean in the long term, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good.
When we come back, we'll explore some of the long-term risks and potential scenarios that could come out of this trade war and what it all means for a future of global trade. We've talked a lot about tariffs and trade deficits and global power dynamics, but I kind of want to shift gears a little and talk about the human impact of this whole trade war.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about numbers and abstract economic forces.
Yeah.
This is about real people's lives.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in like the big picture stuff, like
Right.
all the data and the geopolitical analysis.
Yeah.
But we can't forget that these policies, these decisions, they have real consequences for people,
Right.
families and communities on both sides.
Exactly. And those consequences aren't always super obvious or immediate.
Right.
Think about it. The products you use every single day, your phone, your clothes, the food you eat,
Hmm.
it's all connected to this global trade web.
Yeah, most of us don't really think about the network of suppliers and manufacturers and distributors that bring all that stuff to us. But when that network gets disrupted,
Yeah.
like with tariffs or trade wars,
Right.
it can have a ripple effect,
Right.
leading to higher prices, shortages, even job losses.
It's like that butterfly effect thing.
Right.
A small change in one place can have huge consequences somewhere else.
Exactly. And those consequences aren't always spread out evenly either.
Okay.
Certain industries get hit harder than others.
Right.
Think about the impact on American farmers. China was buying a lot of U.S. agricultural products.
Yeah.
And those tariffs meant many farmers lost a huge market for their goods.
So this isn't just about theoretical models and strategies.
Right.
It's about real people whose jobs and livelihoods are affected by these decisions.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to the U.S. either.
Oh, sure.
Think about the workers in those Chinese factories.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who rely on orders from American companies. When
Yeah.
those orders dry up because of tariffs or whatever, those workers are the ones who lose their jobs and struggle.
It's a good reminder that trade wars don't just impact national economies.
Yeah.
They impact the lives of everyday people in ways that are really unpredictable.
And it really shows how interconnected we are.
Yeah.
We're all part of this massive web of relationships, economic and social.
Yeah.
And when you mess with that web, there are always consequences.
So we've talked about the risks, the potential downsides, the impact on people.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens now?
Yeah.
Is there a way to get out of this trade war? Or are we stuck in this back and forth of tariffs and rising tensions?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
We can't predict the future, but we can say that we need a change in mindset.
Okay.
We got to move away from this idea that one side has to win and the other has to lose.
You mean that zero-sum mentality?
Exactly. It's like we're all fighting over slices of a pie and someone has to end up with the biggest piece.
Right.
But it's short-sighted and it doesn't really work. In a globalized world, our economies are so intertwined that trying to hurt your competitor often hurts you too.
So what's the alternative?
Well,
How do we fix this mess?
it starts with talking to each other.
Okay.
Open communication, actually listening to the other side's concerns.
Right.
Instead of just throwing tariffs at each other, we need to find ways to solve problems through negotiation and compromise.
That sounds good, but can we really expect that?
Well,
These are two global superpowers with very different goals and ways of doing things.
it won't be easy for sure.
Right.
There's a lack of trust and they have totally different economic and political systems.
Right.
But if we don't do something, this trade war will keep hurting everyone and messing up global trade, and that's just not sustainable.
So we're back to those unintended consequences. If this
Mhm.
keeps escalating, things could get a lot worse.
Exactly. And it won't just be the U.S. and China that feel it.
Right.
It'll affect the global economy, disrupt those supply chains we talked about, make prices go up for everyone.
Right.
It could even undermine the whole international trading system.
That's a scary thought. So what can we do about it?
Well,
As individuals, I mean, can we even influence something this big?
of course we can. As citizens, we have a voice. We can stay informed about the issues, have discussions, contact our elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
We can support businesses that are committed to fair trade and responsible practices.
It's a good reminder that even when things seem really overwhelming,
Right.
we're not powerless.
We can make a difference by staying involved and pushing for policies that encourage cooperation and benefit everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's a good place to wrap things up.
Okay.
So thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the U.S.-China trade war. It's complicated and it's constantly changing.
It is.
But hopefully this has given you some insights and things to think about. And remember, what happens in one part of the world can affect us all.
It's true.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time.